I think with interviewing, one of the hardest problems is actually figuring out who is the person versus what's performative. And in the interview process, the company is going to see many different people and often ask very similar questions. The candidate might have the same talk track for all of them. So a lot of it is really, how do you get off the talk track and get to know the real human?
From Numeric, this is Incoming Statements, the podcast built for forward-thinking accounting pros. Join Anthony Alvernas, Numeric's co-founder and chief product officer, as he talks with accounting leaders about what practices and philosophies are defining modern financial operations. So grab your coffee, throw on some headphones, and let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Incoming Statements. I'm your host, Anthony Alvernas from Numeric, and today we're joined by Colin Anderson. Colin is the former CFO of Palantir Technologies and has co-founded Friends and Family Capital, a VC firm that partners with founders and CFOs to build world-class businesses. Colin, thanks so much for giving us some time today. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Anthony.
Well, Colin, thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited to dig right in. Before we get into really anything substantive, would love to understand for all the folks listening in today, who are you? What's your story?
Well, thanks for having me, Anthony. Excited to be here. Look, Colin Anderson, I'm co-founding partner of a firm called Friends and Family Capital, and we're a Silicon Valley-based venture capital firm. Really, our goal is to back entrepreneurs that are transforming big markets. And the way we do that, what we think is very differentiated, is we're really helping build for founders and for CFOs a world-class finance function. So think team, think operations, think capital raise. That's really where we want to partner. And every world-class business is going to need this. And we've purpose-built our team to help founders on that journey. Why would people ask us those questions? I think a lot of it comes from my prior experience. I was the longtime CFO at Palantir Technologies from the early days to building a business of substance. We were on one floor of one building in Palo Alto. We had about 100 people and single-digit revenue. Kept my head down. 8 years later, we're 2,000 people. We're a $20 billion private company. We've got some the world-class engineers working on our mission. We're working with amazing customers, brilliant investors, and I think we're probably doing around $2 billion in bookings that year. And the finance team alone was about 50 people. So just a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly of what does it take over an 8-year journey to build not only a great business. I mean, today they're $250 billion, and the people we recruited on the team are still leading that. But what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And trying to take those lessons and really help founders on their own journey now as Friends and Family Capital.
Amazing. And we'll be excited to dig into some of those learnings and some more of that journey here today. Obviously at that time at Palantir, over that 8-year stretch, some relatively extraordinary growth, some that folks never see in their career, others who might be experiencing that right now. Before we get too tactical, would love to understand early on, was there a moment at Palantir when you realized, oh, wow, we're really building something completely different here. This is really special. What did that feel like? When was that most clear?
There's a rubric that used around the early days of Palantir, but I think is broadly applicable now, whether you're investing in a company or thinking about joining a company. It's really, is this a hard problem and does it matter? And that's kind of a North Star of, is it worth giving years of your life, your days, your nights, your mind share? Is this a problem that's worthy of that pursuit? And in the early days of Palantir and joining that, I mean, this was really the wake of 9/11. And we had this, I would call it a false trade-off now, between advancing the efficient frontier of national security or advancing the efficient frontier of privacy and civil liberties. And you couldn't do both. At least that was the false trade-off. And Palantir really gave a chance to engage on those issues in a very technical way and help advance the frontier in both of those simultaneously. And that felt at the time and still today like a worthy pursuit. And you put your head down and you work for 8 years and you pop your head up. And I was honored to work with people that were much smarter than myself on some of the thorniest challenges, whether it be societal or technological, that I think we encountered in the world. And I'm honored that Palantir's been able to go on and keep doing that even since I left in the public markets.
Yeah, it's an incredibly mission-driven mindset. I think the sort of focus you can only get when you have such a mission-driven context around you, which I think across organizations, what they're trying to build, it's possible to create that. I'm curious for yourself, how did you feel that mission-driven mindset change over time for you? Is that something that you had going into Palantir, sort of knowing the overall mission of the company? Was that something that grew over time for you during that journey?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. There's what in any company, what's the mission of the company, or multiple missions, and then how do you attach value to that mission on a personal level? And I think both really matter. In a great company, if you can have a high enough purpose, then you're attractive to a broad enough set of people that can attach to that mission. So we had some people at Palantir that really wanted to work on the national security side of things. We had other people that really wanted to work on the privacy and civil liberties side of things. It turns out it was the same thing, but you could work on both simultaneously. It wasn't a false trade-off. And then you could go down a layer. Some of it was, hey, I want to make sure that someone who's stepping into a region or a job where they don't know if they're coming back that night, I want to keep them safe. Like, that's something that a lot of people can get behind. Either they know someone, or they have a life experience, or it was their experience. Some of it was finding someone who's missing. Some of it was, just how do we keep those that are least able to protect and defend themselves? How do we keep them safe? So there's a whole bunch of ways, whatever your calling card was. And I think that really matters with a company. If you're going to attract the best and brightest and get them to dedicate 10 years of their life, it's building a company is not a one-year endeavor. You shouldn't join a thing unless you say, this is important enough to me that I want to give it some of the best years of my life and my best effort. You really want to find that. For me at Palantir, from the early days, it was, the overcoming that false trade-off really attracted me. And also I had been inside of a large organization beforehand and just seen the data integration challenges firsthand. I as a junior minted undergraduate was a very expensive piece of middleware. I should not be doing data transforms as a human that has to go home and sleep at night. Seeing that just within one organization, I thought, wow, the U.S. government or important institutions that are keeping the West running, they must have this problem in spades. Like, this is a chance to actually really push on a thing that mattered. So brought me there and kept me there.
How would you say some of that impacted, obviously that's kind of a mindset I'm sure permeated what attracted folks, not just yourself, but the team that you built. How do you think that impacted how you evaluated who you wanted to hire? And as you scaled that team to 50, what remained true the whole time?
Totally. I like the framing of the question. Sometimes it's like, well, what changed? I think the right question is what's consistent.
Yeah.
I think on the team side, there's really a few things. If you're going through hyper growth, you need to hire people that are there for the right reason. A story that I would share internally and still with portfolio companies today, imagine you're walking along a path and you see two people that are chipping away at some rock. You ask the first person, what are you doing? They say, oh, I'm cutting stone. You ask the second person, what are you doing? They say, I'm building a cathedral. Like, you should hire that second person every single time. And a lot of the interview was, you get through okay, can they do the technical details? Are they creative? Can they run things? But like, what's the purpose? Why is someone doing this? And at the end of the day, not every day, you guys know this, not every day inside startup life is easy. Not everything is up and to the right. There's going to be challenges, and what gets you through those dark times. And it's really knowing that you're giving your best in pursuit of something that's worthy, and purpose does that. So however, it goes back to that mission, however you're attaching yourself to that. So whether it's, I think in the Palantir context, it was advance the efficient frontier of national security and privacy and civil liberties. For me, I think in the accounting world, it's how do you bring legibility and trust to an ecosystem where global commerce depends on it, and we're behind on that? How do you help humans do more with less? I think you can. There's always a bigger purpose on why we're doing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly, and a lot of that feels not necessarily in a way that prioritizes one fully over the other, but feels to me very much like hiring people driven by mission over or rather than credentials. And I'm curious if that ever led to bringing on someone who might have seemed unconventional on paper, but turned out to be really exceptional. Just sort of given that sort of mindset importance.
Totally. I would say the sense of purpose and the higher order, it's necessary but not sufficient. So they have to have it, but they also have to have many other skills as well. Some of those, although I would say another framework there that would be hire CPU, not database. And that really means if you hire overclocked people who you can put them in front of anything that they've never seen before, and they're willing to do it and they're willing to try it, knowing that they might fail, but they have a chance if they try to win, and they're doing it for the right reason, then I love making that bet. There was often times where we could find someone on our team, just back to a building Palantir story, where we might have someone who was operationally very good at what they did. And we said, hey, they have a peak here, a world-class talent that we could actually use over here on this other side of the finance team that we didn't know we needed, but now we need. We could go run an external search where you're kind of taking a chance, you don't know, or we could say this person's world-class, but they don't actually know the exact nuance of it. I know they have the CPU, they don't have the database, and really working with them and saying, look, I'm willing to invest a lot of time and money in making you be successful in this role because I think you have something special. So I think it's not only what you look for in the people, but it's also if you're on your journey of building your career, how do you find a company where people are willing to invest in you at the atomic level and take that chance, and where the primary reward is responsibility and getting to see more. I think that's especially in the early phases of anyone's career, very important. The more you see, the faster you get to see it, the more responsibility you get, the more you can grow as an individual.
Yeah, and these really, I feel like oftentimes you'll hear how much early hires can set the tone of a team, of an organization. I think certainly in the early stages of building a business, it's really obvious how the marginal hire has such a substantial impact in one direction or the other. But some of what you're saying there to me sounds, as much as it is the early hires, it's that early environment that you create of folks understanding that they're being invested in as people. Did you ever have any moments of doubt in hiring the initial team, and how did you get past those? Where would you sort of put your barometer on assessing overall fit in some of those earlier years?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's made their fair share of hiring mistakes. I think overall we got it pretty right, and I'm very proud of the team we built, and we did it pretty efficiently. It's in the one pitfall in the early days is I assumed that I should hire someone, quote out of central casting. It was like, okay, I'm building finance for a company. We should hire someone who has done finance. And I talked to many people who had done finance. And I was missing that purpose piece. I think I was missing that CPU piece, and I was really over optimized on the database piece. I must have talked to 50 different people, and none of them were quite right. And one of the senior people at Palantir called me in and said, "Hey, Colin, is finance hard?" And I was like, "Well, right, you have a double-edged sword. You'd like to everyone would like to think that the thing that they do is hard, but you also know." So a reframe of that was, is it teachable? And it's like, yes, finance is teachable. I did not know finance when I was born. It can be taught, and it's kind of just math. And if you're an engineer, it's a system of linear constraints, and you kind of just apply them, and there's certain rules that have to check out. So yeah, it's teachable. And so this executive told me, great, just go hire your smartest friend and teach them. And that reframe helped me think, okay, who wants to build? Who's entrepreneurial? Who can be taught? And who can identify with the purpose of what we're doing. And that reframe helped say, actually, you already know the person you should hire. And it was obvious. I talked to one person, they said, sure, I'll come in. And, a few interviews and a lot of textbooks later, they were helping scale the team.
Amazing. Yeah, we definitely maintain that a lot of finance and accounting professionals are very analogous to engineers in terms of how they think, very systematic thinkers. I do think a lot of that, I've never thought about it in that perspective, but a lot of that can be boiled down to who's excited to just understand a problem and approach it in a creative way that has a sort of relentless dedication to it. When you were sort of thinking about assessing who is that person, who was that sort of first person that you turned to, and really on the journey of those 50 folks you churned through, what sort of questions or methods did you rely on to try to understand, is this the right fit? Did someone possess that sort of CPU sort of clock speed?
I mean, there's the straight CPU. There's a whole bunch of other factors. I think
clock speed, cores. We don't have to get too. How far can we extend the analogy here? So more about just questions or methods you rely on to figure out what are someone's core values. How do I know they have the high clock speed? That sort of like you went through 50 people. Like where maybe twofold. Both, how did you know that one person you turned to was going to be the right one, and then did that shape the way in which you assessed folks, and how'd you change that assessment?
Yeah, so I think with interviewing, one of the hardest problems is actually figuring out who is the person versus what's performative. And in the interview process, the company is going to see many different people and often ask very similar questions. The candidate might have the same talk track for all of them. So a lot of it is really, how do you get off the talk track and get to know the real human? And then once you can do that, it's really a function of how do you engage on something where you have a shared understanding, so you can actually be in a position to understand the context in which they respond. And then you also, the hard part is, how do you establish a set of priors, understand a response, and then change the context and maybe take people off script. And that's where you really see creative thought. And so like that's one technique to get to it. But I think the real thing is, who is this person at their core? What's driving them? It could be a very short interview. It could be a very long interview, but you really, you need to cut away from all the noise and really get to that signal.
Yep.
I'm not perfect at it. There was, people at Palantir that were much better, but I think over 8 years of building a team, got pretty good at finding ways to get to it. Still make mistakes, but I'm honored by the team that we built, and many of them are still leading finance at Palantir today.
Well, thinking about that team and thinking about just the general approach to building staffing capacity, I feel like oftentimes companies love to talk about agility and lean team. And in some ways, for those on the team, that sort of concept of lean can almost be like a bad word. It can sort of feel like that. What that means is you're overextending folks. To what extent did you ever have to learn the lesson of, or a counterpoint to this notion that lean could be too lean in certain circumstances? Any boundary discovery across your journey that comes to mind?
It's funny. I'd almost reject the term lean, because that presupposes that there is an appropriate level and then you should be below the appropriate level. Yeah. I would actually reframe it as, from a first principles standpoint, what are the critical functions of a finance organization for a company? And then how do you hire the people that have the unique skill set that, through human plus building a system, allows them to build the quantitative lens and push that out to the organization, such that you can get a compounding right back at scale from people who are disaggregated from the actual data themselves. So sorry, very, it's a non-standard, but I think really, if you look at what is the role of a finance team, it's a business has gotten too complex where the founder can't keep track of it all in their head, or it's not 10 people in a room where everyone kind of knows what everyone's doing. So it's sort of saying, how do you build a quantitative lens so you can take a metrics view on things that you used to be able to intuit, but now you're just further from the coalface and you can't quite do it anymore, and you need that buttress of a new blind spot that's popped up, and enter the quantitative lens. And I think it really comes in a few flavors, and it took me a while to figure out what those flavors should be. I'd never done this before, but through trial and error, I sort of thought about this as, you have past, present, and future, and each one has a very important role in terms of how you understand your business and how you invest to grow into the future. So let's just go reverse, order of, let's go through time. Let's take accounting. I think accounting is really about trust and hygiene, and how do you know the things that you believe to be true are correct? And there's a very important rule set on that, and it takes great knowledge. It also takes, great thinking of, okay, what does this mean? And getting that right is tough, and it's critically important. Next sequence through time is just the present. How do you make sure that the bill that needs to get paid today gets paid today? How do you make sure the people that need to approve it today approve it today? And that's a different peak. That's how do you design systems that flow? How do you exception handling? So a lot of that is getting the right people, but also designing the right processes. Not only so you can do it today, but also so that it pumps it into a clean, legible format, so that someone with an accounting lens can say, yep, very quickly, this is right. Based on those two, you can actually start to say, okay, what could the future look like? And I think you can set goals, but I'm more of a empiricist than a theorist, whatever, I'm going to butcher it. But what did you do already? What do I know to be true? What have I done? What happened in the present? And I know this with high fidelity because I've done it and recorded it, and I've checked it. Through that, you can roll forward what the future might look like. And when you take all three of those lenses on reality and you bring them in a way that the business can understand, you can actually say, make very important business decisions. Should I invest in this person here? Should I invest in that customer there? And really, it's really just to fill back to that first principles. Where are the blind spots of the business? Just because the complexity is so high. And it takes a team effort of all three of those lenses to really help support the business on that journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So all three lenses obviously result in different learnings across the life cycle of a company, across companies. You obviously have seen a lot in your capacity as an investor, beyond your time at Palantir as well. I'm curious if you were to think about just distilling that sort of application of all three lenses across focal lengths, across companies, and if you were thinking through what does a sort of cheat sheet look like for teams that are designing their first finance org today, what's something that you think early stage companies might be missing the mark on, or something that is someone, an investment a year earlier might mean it's saving someone multiple years down the line, or it's helping them scale in a way that they might not have realized was coming, without that future lens being something they properly weighted. Anything unexpected that you'd sort of put that on?
I mean, so many things. I think structurally the nature of finance is it's one of those areas of the business where, and not always, but generally, it's not invested in until you need it today, and then people need it immediately, if not yesterday. But it's also one of those things where it takes time to build the systems right and to get the right people doing it. So there's always this structural impedance of expectations to reality. So I think you're always a little bit behind, and I remind portfolio companies building today, like, look, give it a little time. You've got to get these systems right. Going back to, okay, let's assume that we understand that you're probably behind the 8 ball and you need to build structure into that. I think one of the first key things, if you had to do, is one, get the right people on board. And that's going to be team members that can solve not only the challenges of today, but also they're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. So get people that are maybe overclocked, overexperienced, not necessarily in what they've done on paper, but what they can do, just very high potential, and let them loose and understand the core areas of the business that will need support. Next, I would say get some systems in that make sense. And those systems should, the beauty of technology, the promise of technology is how do you do much, much more with less or the same? And so how do you create a force multiplier for those really talented humans to then go on and do more? And 15 years ago at Palantir, those, the tool set for the CFO stack was pretty rudimentary. I think it's come a long way now, and that saves a lot of time, whether you're an accountant, whether you're, on a FinOps team, or whether you're the analytics side. So I think there's a lot of great things there, but really get the system right that does what you need it to do. And then really it's about hygiene and legibility. And it's one of these things where you can solve the today problem, but if you don't create the hygiene and legibility of, okay, what was true? Are we precise around it? Answering questions later is going to be very, very tough. Like in the early days of Palantir, we didn't, it was a small team. We didn't really have a good toolkit. So we were running off paper invoices. That was a problem. So it was like, okay, let's just digitize, right? Okay. And let's make it where, we know should something have been paid? Was it approved? Was it paid? Like very basic stuff. Now you probably have this natively out of your, whatever platforms you're setting up. But back then it wasn't the case. So it was create that legibility around, do you know what happened? Do you know, should it have happened? And do you have that state knowledge on what was paid and for what reason? And you do it a little bit every day. I would call it data tagging, something we talk about a lot at Palantir. If you tag your data, then actually the thing that you can do is in the future, you can arbitrarily ask almost any question you need to of that data and get an answer back in real time. Whereas if you haven't tagged that data and you don't have it in a legible system, you can ask a question, but it'll be a one-off question. You'll spend 1 or 2 cycles trying to go answer that question in a one-off way. You'll get an answer, but fast forward, the time it took you to answer that, maybe the question's changed. Maybe the person who had that question says, that's great. Now let's push on this one piece of it. So I'd really say build the hygiene get the right people to build the system to build hygiene in your systems. And that will save you so much time in the future because you'll be able to ask any question you need to.
Some of that concept of the sort of data tagging, you'll need it later, you can answer questions in real time, of course, all very much resonate. I'm sure with many folks listening today. I'm sure some folks find themselves in circumstances where maybe their team didn't have that degree of hygiene for years, and they're looking at a sort of backlog of data that they don't know how to use. And in some ways that might reflect a really substantial structural mistake that they've made. Would love to understand a bit more about, how you generally think about embracing technology as finance orgs, how, finance orgs might attract more risk-averse personalities in some contexts, and how, how at Palantir you were able to sort of balance that traditional, or at least the conception of traditionally, more of a conservative approach to building, with that inherently ambitious culture at Palantir, and how that concept of tag the data now, we're going to need it later, might not be one that resonates with all teams yet, or may not have over time. So any thoughts you have there on helping folks kind of change that mindset a bit and approach things with that more ambitious perspective?
Totally. Well, I would start out just by saying every perspective around the table on a finance team, it's a heterogeneous set of skills. I liken it, an analogy we used to use at Palantir a lot was everyone's playing a different instrument. And that's great. So find people who are really great at their instrument, but then also help them play together. And then also keep the band together. And as a leader, that part of your job is just make sure the band stays together, and helping people realize that, yes, you may play guitar, they may play drums, but the song sounds better when you play together. So I'd say bringing both lenses. What is, you could say the more traditional lens, what is the more skeptical lens, what is the more, it doesn't matter, but there's value from each of those lenses, and then figuring out how to harness it in the right way. On the data tagging side, I mean, every 2 to 3 years, if you're growing quickly, the nature of your business and the rhythm of that business is going to change. And you might have to refactor your system. So we would always say, don't let perfect get in the way of good. Build something that can take you to that next plateau, and recognize that at some point the system will break. And great, that means we get to refactor it all again, and it'll be fun. So there was, we would do, and the general ledger that we set up in the early days of Palantir was not the general ledger that we needed rolling forward 4 years from now. So we said, okay, let's do a GL refactor bash. And we took 3 nights, and we got the whole finance team, and we projected the GL up on, in the conference room, and we all had pizza and soda and Red Bull and coffee and whatever you needed to stay awake. And we just said, okay, what is the nature of the way things move through the GL? Does our tagging structure actually capture that? And we had the operators around, the FinOps team around the table. We had the accountants around the table. We had the analytics team around the table. And it was that give and take that got us to some really good foundational stuff, and helped us not only be on the same page that day, but also build a structure that helped us run much faster later. So I think if there's a give and a take, and each perspective really matters. Also on refactoring systems, I didn't know tagging mattered in the beginning, right? You're kind of like, all right, turns out it matters. We took, again, I think you're sensing a theme. It's about 3 or 4 people, about a week, and they kind of just took this on themselves and locked themselves in. They closed the door and said, we just want to play loud music, don't bug us. And they went through and systematically tagged the purpose of all of our expenses over that 4-day period. And at the end of it, we had really good data. And we said, all right, let's chunk off what matters most. He said, okay, well, things that happened most recently is more important. So he said, okay, let's do this year. Okay, great, let's do last year. And each time you get a little bit better, and you can start to say, okay, you're probably going to see the same vendor multiple times. So you can start to say, okay, categorically create a canonical system that every time I see that vendor, it maps them to this. Now there's software that if you did it the right way, you could, but it's not insurmountable. It's just hard work, and it may not be fun, but if it matters, take your team, block off their time, spend, a week and get it in place, and you'll see compounding returns to scale. Anyway, just a few stories, but you need everyone around the table.
No, absolutely. And there's an element here I'm hearing of being able to rally folks around solving a hard problem, solving a problem that might seem insurmountable, but that the cognitive reframing of it isn't, and in fact it's a priority enough that we're just going to do it. Curious for yourself, ever a time or ever the sort of learning in retrospect that of your own role changing or evolving in a way that was personally challenging? For some, that whole concept of we're going to sit around, stay up all night, drink some Red Bull and get this thing done might have been a foreign thing for folks. Curious for you personally, anything that was challenging that for yourself required some cognitive reframing, or in retrospect, you sort of look back on with excitement of it was really a time of personal growth, during that stint at Palantir.
Totally. The one thing that other early exec at the company told me very early on was anything, as we're hyperscaling, anything that you can productize and give away to someone else and it will still track, you should do that. Anything that only you can do, you should hold on to. And that was a very easy A/B test on new things that came down the pike. Say, is this how should I try to internalize this? And in the early days, you're a pure IC. And in the early days, it was just an IC. But over time, I realized, okay, what are the things that I know very well? What are the things that I can productize and hire for? And then what are the things that only I can hold on to? And over time, it's constantly reevaluating. Do we understand the nature of the way this piece of the business moves such that you can trust someone else to execute on it? Granted, it's still on you if they're not put in a position to succeed, but you need to start to really put yourself in a position where you can let others succeed. And I think that's a core challenge, going from individual contributor to being a people lead or a workflow lead, and learning how to say, okay, how do I give someone enough responsibility that they feel empowered and they look forward to a hard project that they will feel a sense of accomplishment when they finish it. So enough rope to run, but also where they know that you're there to help them. And it's kind of a balancing act of always positioning them for success, letting them run, being there to help them if they need it. And that can take, some people get it right away. Some people, it can take a lifetime to learn. I think that's a really important part of the journey. And now stepping in almost as a fractal of that, stepping in now as an investor and not in the builder's seat, it's been an interesting journey, because you want to roll up your sleeves and build, and you have to realize, you know what, you've talked about it, you've backed an amazing team, they're world class, it's their decision, and maybe they'll take your advice, maybe they'll say, hey, that was great, but actually I understand the business better than you, I'm going to do it somewhere different. Great. So it's take the ego out, really approach it first principle, try to invest in great people, and then let them, let the players on the field play. And I think it's a fractal all the way up.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I'm as an investor now, do you therefore find yourself gravitating towards founders whose missions sort of align with your own sense of purpose, your own way of seeing the world? Where do you think about some of that evaluative aspect in terms of those learnings and how they've shaped your overall perspectives?
Totally. There's a simple heuristic I use. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's done pretty well so far. Is, would you want to work at this company? And if you wouldn't want to work at this company, you probably shouldn't invest in them with capital. And there's all these downstream effects of that. Are the people someone that you'd want to work with or for? Is the mission big enough that you're willing to commit years of your life and sacrifices in pursuit of what they're trying to achieve? All sorts of is this a thing where you'd want to tell your friends what you're building? If you're, can you explain it simply enough to your parents so that they can, be excited for you, even though they may not understand what you're actually doing? There's all these little things, but I'd say make sure, if you're joining a company or you're investing in a company, make sure that you find it meaningful. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to keep you through the hard times. And that's what you're going to look back on.
And so much of that meaning can be derived from some of the stories, right? The stories that you can tell, that both from a motivational aspect, but also, from a way of potentially filling in some gaps, right? I'm curious, finance as storytelling is a fascinating concept. I think for many, any compelling story that you've ever found yourself telling investors, and one where, perhaps the data lag behind the vision at first, and where you were able to use that as a sort of stopgap that proved true, with future forward chaining correlation.
Totally. So it's funny, in the early days of a company, there are no metrics. There's zero revenue, there's zero year over year, because you don't even have 1 year. And so the whole nature of the early part of a company is narrative driven. What is the thing that's, what is the market that you see? What's broken in that market? How can you fix it? What is the atomic value to a customer, and how can you deliver that? How do you deliver them 10x value? How do you capture a little bit of that? You can build a business around that. I think one mistake I made in the early days is we were very narrative driven in the early days of Palantir, because there's no data. But then fast forward, we started to get quantitative metrics. And naively, I thought, okay, well, we told the story because we had to tell the story, but now we can talk about the data, and the data will tell the story. And I actually think it's reverse. And the whole goal of building and storytelling, whether it was Palantir or a venture fund or a company in which we invest, it's really what's the opportunity that you see? What's broken? How are you going to fix it? How do you deliver outsized customer value? What are those atomic units of investment that you need to pursue to make it work? And then how does the customer win at the end of the day? And the numbers, so whether it's coming from accounting, whether it's coming from finance, it's really sort of a checksum. Does the story that you're telling make sense? Have we seen this before? If we roll this story forward, does it still make sense? But I think it all comes down to what's the narrative. And I think over time, investors, rightfully so, expect the numbers to back up the narrative you're telling. And where there's a dissonance, there's questions. And really the goal as you're building a company is how do you still tell the story of what you're building and then back that up with numbers? And again, that goes back to data tagging. How do you make sure that you can answer and tell that story in the way that the data plays out?
And now on the investor side, what stories do you find excite you the most today? I mean, what is that compelling narrative, thematically that you feel like gets you all excited and strategically aligns?
Man, there's so many ways to take this. I think it's in some ways a great time to be investing, whether it's, a platform shift of AI, whether you believe it, whether it's that people are now saying, hey, let's work on things that aren't just selling ads to people online or helping teenagers connect online. I think that you're seeing more mission-driven companies out there. I think it's a great time to be a part of that, and I love what I do, and that having built Palantir puts me in a position to work with some of the top, entrepreneurs in the world. So I feel incredibly blessed every day. I think it goes back, it's not what changed, but it's what's still the same. And I think it's still who has a really hard problem, who's built really smart people who are trying to solve that problem, and why does that problem matter? And even though it's simple, it's kind of guided the last 20 years of how I've invested my time and my capital, and it's proved out. And so you look at what SpaceX is doing, you look at what Anduril is doing, you look at there's many companies, Gecko is doing, Numeric is doing. I think you're just seeing across the board some really great companies by thoughtful people. They're saying, hey, this really matters, and I'm gonna build a really smart team around the table to try to solve it. And chances are, if it's worthy problem and you get smart people, you'll probably figure it out. And I don't know, it's fun. So I'm excited by that.
Tremendous. Well, that smart people, hard problems certainly is what gets us excited as well. I'm curious if you were to sort of look back at your journey holistically, Palantir, or the investing you do now, what's something you believe pretty strongly, anything sort of fundamental, now to kind of take the other side, obviously a bit of a theme here talking about what's remained true, what's remained consistent, but anything that you think your younger self would be shocked by, either something you've observed, a learning that you now apply, where do you feel like some perspectives have changed?
In terms of what you would build, in terms of what
I would say really generally, any perspective of yours that you feel like you have today, you find somewhat fundamental to how you think or see the world, and it's different than it was 15 years ago.
Man, that's a good question, because you not only have to accurately model, what you're
where you were
today, but it's also, do you have state knowledge? It's like
right.
So running the diff is hard because we forget the nuance of 15 years.
It needs disk space and CPU.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I think the nature of like what did I believe 15 years ago and what do I now believe? I think maybe this is a little naivete, but I studied engineering, but also with a financial angle in the undergraduate, and then did 2 years in the finance industry. I think if you're in the finance industry, you start to think that the numbers dominate, and that either it's the numbers tell the narrative, or the person that's closest to the numbers knows the right answer. But over time, and it took some time inside Palantir to figure it out, but actually the numbers is just one part of it. And especially in the Valley, the person who can build, the engineer, is actually the person who creates transformative values for customers. And the finance is really more of a support role. How do you build the scaffolding such that the people who are enabling transformative value for customers can do that? And that was a change, right? If you've operated inside of an investment bank, or you've been on something where the core value driver for that entity is finance and quantitative, it's a hard. But inside the Valley, it's really who can productize something that delivers transformative value to the customer, and who can do that in a repeatable way and defensible way. So that was a lesson that I'd say changed as I've spent just more time here, and it's really informed. How do you whether you're in venture or whether you're a CFO, I think you're in it's a support role, and it's helping the people who can create the value say, hey, what do you need? How can I help you do that? And sometimes it's by giving them legibility on what they've been doing because they've got that blind spot. Sometimes it's going out there and telling the story of what they're building in such a way that someone who's an investor can say, okay, I actually understand this. I see how it works. I'll give you the capital so that you can worry about the capital and give that to the engineer so that they can keep productizing. I did not realize that 15, 20 years ago. And now it's more true than ever. So
tremendous.
Take a service mindset and a support mindset if you're in finance and working in technology.
Wonderful. We appreciate the insight, Colin. Well, time has flown by here. We'll have to have you back for another episode. We'll call it there and really appreciate all the thoughts.
Thank you, Anthony. Pleasure to be here.
You've been listening to Incoming Statements, a production of Numeric. To learn how AI and automation are eliminating the manual burdens holding your accounting team back, visit numeric.io. Join us next time to hear from more top accounting voices on the challenges they're facing and where they see the industry heading.